Recall that the circulating capital of a society is composed of four parts: 1. Provisions, 2. Materials, 3. Finished work, and 4. Money. The first three, provisions, materials, and finished work, constitute consumable goods, and whatever portion of consumable goods is not employed in maintaining the fixed capital of a society makes part of the neat revenue of the society, which is the stock of that society which is reserved for immediate consumption. That is the viewpoint as taken by the point of view of society as a whole within a nation. Now I would like to talk about the circulating capital within any given enterprise. I will cite two examples, one involving hammers, and the second example will involve timber being purchased by a house builder. In the former case, the hammers are purchased by a type of enterprise which hammers small amounts of gold into gold leaf, sheets of gold. Here, the hammers form part of the provisions of that particular enterprise which hammers these items of gold into thin gold leaf. Within the second example, the timber purchased by the house builder from the timber merchant constitutes part of the materials which he requires to build the finished product. So, in the former case, the item purchased becomes part of the provisions, and in the latter case, the item purchased becomes part of the materials. Recall that circulating capital comprises provisions, materials, finished goods, and money. Recall also that when calculating the neat revenue, we must only consider provisions, materials, and finished goods, not money. We previously defined the neat revenue to be the stock reserved for immediate consumption. But I would like to query at what point the hammer becomes consumed. Is it at the point where it leaves the stock of finished products at the hammer manufacturer's location? Note that the enterprise which hammers gold leaf does not consume as part of its immediate consumption the hammers, because these form part of the required provisions which are necessary in order to perform this enterprise. The merchant does not consume his stock, because that would be bad accountancy. His circulating capital, quote, is totally excluded from making any part of his neat revenue, which must consist altogether in his profits. End quote. This means that out of his profits, from his profits, he acquires the component part of money which is to be used for his immediate consumption. The hammers, which ultimately formed part of the provisions of the enterprise which hammered gold into gold leaf, did actually form part of the neat revenue of the society to which the enterprise which manufactures hammers belongs. Although these hammers, when regarded as part of the neat revenue of a society, become not consumed actually by the stock of any individual or enterprise which is reserved for immediate consumption, they do become consumed in a sense. And so, in this regard, the neat revenue does comprehend the stock reserved for immediate consumption, but it also comprehends provisions and materials as part of some further enterprise. This is the case when regarded as the neat revenue of a society, but not as the neat revenue of an individual or an enterprise. To cite the example of the house builder garnering timber from the timber merchant, the house builder does not put the timber into his stock reserved for immediate consumption, because he does not consume this himself, and that would be incorrect accountancy anyway. This timber does form part of the materials required to construct a house. So we may say that the timber forms part of the neat revenue of a society, but not that of the enterprise as this house builder. Does a house become consumed when it is bought? Well, in a way, yes, and in a way, no. A house is an asset which, if left uncared for, will fall into dilapidation over time. So, a house is an asset which degrades over time. And so, in this sense, a house is a consumable commodity. A punnet of strawberries is also a consumable commodity, which degrades pretty quickly, a lot more quickly than a house does so. So a house is a much better asset than a lot of strawberries because it retains its value, its worth, its cost for much longer than the strawberries will. So a house can also be treated as an asset. If I am in the strawberry merchant business, strawberries, which I purchase as my materials for trade, are also an asset. But these strawberries will perish quite quickly. Unless I sell them on soon, I won't be able to recover my investment. Though the timber in the timber merchant's enterprise must by no means be placed within the stock of the timber merchant which is reserved for his immediate consumption. This timber may be consumed by home buyers whom replace the value of the timber to the timber merchant together with profits upon this timber, and these home buyers obtain this acquisition from a revenue derived from other funds such as their wages or the profits of their own enterprises. And this replacing to the timber of the timber merchant does not occasion any diminution either in the capital of the timber merchant nor the capital of the home buyer. The reason why the capital of the home buyer is not decreased is because the house is being paid for out of profits of the home buyer's enterprise or the home buyer's wages. Money itself is an asset as a form of capital, but it does not constitute capital revenue because capital revenue must be material, tangible stuff such as the materials to work upon or the finished products or the fuel which is provided to the factory. This is another revelation, or should we say heresy. I shall say that fixed capital, such as a factory owner's machinery, is part of the set of provisions which this factory owner requires. And in that sense, these assets are part of the circulating capital. Recall that circulating capital consists of provisions, materials, finished goods, and money. The reason why I include fixed capital such as machinery within the provisions of the enterprise which the factory owner owns is because he might need to be provided with machinery which he pays for out of his profits. Recall that his profits may be spent upon maintaining his fixed capital, such as maintaining his existing machinery or factory buildings, or in the alternative, his profits may be funneled into his niche revenue, which is his stock reserved for immediate consumption, which is not part of the provisions, materials, and finished products of his enterprise. When I say his stock reserved for immediate consumption, I mean that which he purchases by using his niche revenue in order to use these items himself or give them to his friends. Now, after he has built his factory and furnished it with productive machinery, neither his factory nor his machinery constitutes part of the gross revenue of his enterprise. This is because his gross revenue consists of that part of his provisions, materials, and finished products which are within flux, which are being exchanged. He is keeping his factory. He is keeping his machinery. He is not selling it on like a merchant of machinery would sell the machinery. He is not in the business of constructing factories to sell them to other entrepreneurs. He has acquired the assets as his factory and his machinery for the purpose of their use. So it is what his machinery does and the actions which his labourers perform which changes the materials into the finished product. And of course, he has to pay for the provisions as fuel and water for his factory to function. He also has to pay for the materials which his factory works upon in order to create the finished product. Fuel is provisions, and provisions in this sense, the circulatory sense, is part of his circulating capital. His provisions in the fixed sense, although part of his provisions, aren't circulating. So these provisions, such as machinery and factories, the buildings of, are only paid for once and then exist as capital, fixed capital, assets. But the manufacturer of the machinery did sell his machinery when the factory owner bought it. And so, in a sense, his machinery did become consumed when it became part of the provisions, part of the fixed capital provisions of that factory owner. So, when the factory owner acquired these machinery, this consumption did form part of the neat revenue of a society. It didn't form part of the neat revenue of the factory owner. The neat revenue of the factory owner was that part of his profits which he spent upon stock reserved for his immediate consumption. Here, the factory, like a house, is an asset which is owned by the factory owner. The factory, indeed, could be sold to another entrepreneur. And in this sense, the factory itself constitutes part of the neat revenue of a society. My definition of neat revenue of a society is that part of revenue where revenue is tangible material stuff that people within that society have at their disposal to acquire as stock reserved for their immediate consumption. Basically, how wealthy they are. My definition of gross revenue encompasses all the circulating capital, all the investment in fixed capital, and all the neat revenue of all people within that society. I concur with Smith when he says, so money, by means of which the whole revenue of the society is regularly distributed among all its members, makes itself no part of that revenue. This was the heresy I referred to earlier. Smith said, money, therefore, the great wheel of circulation, the great instrument of commerce, like all other instruments of trade, though it makes a part, and a very valuable part, of the capital, makes no part of the revenue of the society to which it belongs. And though the metal pieces of which it is composed, in the course of their annual circulation, distribute to every man the revenue which properly belongs to him, they make themselves no part of that revenue.